And she joins me now. Frances, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well, Brad. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. It's such a pleasure and an honor to talk to you. I mean, somebody of your caliber, I don't get the privilege of talking to all the time. So I'm really thankful for your time. I want to start where it really all started. You are now in the great state of New Mexico, but you are originally from Pennsylvania, according to my internet research. Um, you tell me a little bit about uh, growing up and what did your parents do for a living?
My dad was for 44 years with W.T. Grant Company, which no longer exists as a retail business, but it was very much like Woolworths or Newberry's, or, the five and dimes throughout the South and the West, particularly. Although they moved up into the East and moved all across the state. So Dad was with Grant Company, and consequently, we had a life that was sort of like an army brat's life.
Mm.
He would get transferred as he was promoted and so forth. And so we went basically from the East Coast to the West Coast and many points in between while I was growing up. But it made for a very close knit family because we had to rely on each other so much. And we would get to set down some roots. I mean, we would stay an average of 5 years in a place, and we always felt the connection to the family back east. But um, yeah, so that's the way it was. That's the way it was for me. Went to public schools, and then I went to college in Wisconsin. Then I went to drama school in London for 3 years,
Oh,
and then
wow.
I moved back to the States after that and started my career.
So going to school in London, I mean, that's a pretty big culture shock, especially for three
It was.
years. And I mean, that's a that's a pretty big deal. Why
Yeah,
did you choose to go to Europe to continue your education?
it was the suggestion of Dr. Philip Clarkson, who had directed me in a few plays, which I did extracurricularly in college because I was a philosophy major. So I didn't study acting there, but I always loved to be in plays. And when it came time for my graduation, we were having a conversation, and he was curious to know what I was planning to do, and I had no plans.
As most college students don't, right?
Exactly, exactly. I thought I might be, as we said back in the day, a stewardess so that I
Mhm.
could do some traveling. And then he said, had I ever thought of being an actor? Well, I hadn't. And I said, no, no, how do you do that? And he gave me a few suggestions. And one of them was drama school in London. And my whole little self just perked right up. And I thought, ooh, London. And I thought I would go, oh, that'd be fun. I could go do that for 6 months or something while I figure out what I'm doing. And then I got there and I realized this was a much more serious endeavor than I had understood. And I loved it. And I felt like I had really found my calling. So I stayed.
Wow. So did you do plays in high school and middle school and things like that, or not till you got to
I
college?
did high school. I did high
Mhm.
school and college.
What plays were you in?
I was in a bunch of them. I also did when I was in college. I did summer rep. Two was it 2 summers? Maybe it was just one summer at University of Wisconsin and one summer at the University of Iowa. And they were repertory plays. So I did Point of Departure by Jean Anouilh. I did The Miser, Moliere. So I did a couple, I delved into some pretty, I had done at Ripon College where I went to school to get my bachelor's. I had done a couple of Albee plays, which was pretty avant-garde for the time and place, but it was a great experience for me. I did a Sean O'Casey while I was there. So I had sort of fallen, and I did Shakespeare. I did As You Like It when I was in college. So I had a real affinity for literature, and so England was a perfect place for me to go after that.
So 3 years in England, in London.
That's right.
You come back to the States, and do you come back to Pennsylvania? or do you move
No,
around?
I came back to, well, we only lived in Pennsylvania until I was about 18 months old.
Oh, okay.
And then we moved to White Plains, New York, where we had family. My mother had gone to high school there, and she still had a sister. We had cousins around. My grandmother was living there. So White Plains is really the first place I remember. And we still had some good family friends and family in the area. So that was a natural place for me. New York was the natural place for me to go. And also because I really thought my whole career would be in theater. And so New York was the place to go. Now we're talking about when I got back, we're talking about 1969. That's a while ago. So I was in London for the swinging 60s and got back to New York. And because London, certainly at that time, and I think it still holds true, sets their students up so well to move into a profession. I had introductions to agents back in the States. And that's the largest hurdle, really, for a young actor to go through. And for me, it was already sort of taken care of. So I had an unbelievably easy beginning. Didn't always stay that way, but the beginning and at least getting my foot in the door was really pretty easy for me. So I was
So
very
you say that you were always planning on staying in the theater, or at least doing plays and things of that nature. When
yeah.
did you have your first foray? Because you said you came back in 1969. So
Mhm.
did you do plays for several years in New York,
I
and
did.
then somebody's your agent?
Not so long in New York. I stayed not that long in New York, but then I went to San Francisco to be with the an ingenue with the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco, and that was my heart's love. You know, was to be in repertory theater with a group of actors and doing all these wonderful plays. So that was terrific. But there was an upheaval in that company, and at the time I had. And so I met and married a young actor at that time, and um, there was a big upheaval in the company. And at that point, we decided to go to Los Angeles. And one of the reasons we did that was because I did get cast down there in A Streetcar Named Desire with John Voight and Faye Dunaway. So we went down there on a kind of trial basis and decided, well, we would make the move and we would just see what happened and see what we could do. And it worked out for both of us. So that was 1973, I think is what. So it wasn't that long. It was about, I was back in the States about 4 years. So I was in and out of doing theater from then on.
I always find it fascinating, somebody who comes from the stage to the screen and what you had to do to adapt to it, because it is a different medium. I mean,
Mhm.
when you're in the theater, you're projecting, you're trying to get to the back row in the auditorium, you're using that voice. The camera's right there. It can hear it all, it can see it all.
Yeah.
Did you have any issues making that transition, kind of
I think I
going
probably
smaller?
did in a way, but what was incredibly lucky for me was that very early on, and I think it happened almost, within the first year I was in LA, which is crazy. But I was asked to come in and read across from a group of men, 5 or 6 men. Sorry about that. I
Oh,
think
you're
that
fine.
um, who were reading for the role of I can't think of the character's first name, but Apple in Apple's Way. Um, and so I read opposite all these actors, including Ronnie Cox, and then they cast Ronnie Cox, and then nothing happened. That was that. That was a little gig for me. That was fine, and it was interesting to do. And then I got a call maybe a couple of weeks later and said, "Well, they can't find. They just got used to you." Seeing you play that role, and they didn't find anybody they felt was better. Would you like to do it? I said, yeah. So I was in a series, and that's where I really got my boot camp in terms of film acting. And the what was his name? Rollins, Rawlins. He was the DP, and he was just very patient with me. And he would come up very quietly, when stuff was after we'd rehearsed something, and he'd say, okay, look, this is what the camera's going to see, so this is how, so if you move this way or this way. And so he tutored me basically, and so we did 26 episodes of that, and by the time we were on our fifth or sixth episode, I think I felt pretty intuitive about how to deal with the camera.
So then you do Apple's Way, and I think it was George Apple, what was the name of the
Thank you.
main
You're
character?
right.
Yeah. Um,
I think of Ronnie, you know.
exactly, sure. Um, so you do Apple's Way, you're getting used to being on the screen. And did you go to your agent and say, "I want to do bigger films. I want to do features. I want to be on the silver screen"? Or how did that kind of come about? Because you have some iconic credits,
I
which of
do.
course we'll get
I,
to, legendary credits. So how do you find your way to that point?
first things first. I was never, still am not good at promoting myself or advocating for my own career. I wasn't great at that. I've just never been very clever about that. But I did have a lot of great luck, and I did get noticed occasionally by someone who was doing a great project. And I mean, of course, we talked about, about, well, you should do this, maybe you shouldn't do that, that kind of thing. We would have those conversations. At that point, I was with the Gersh agency. I really think of the Gersh agency as being the agency that was behind most of what the great stuff was that I did. But the other thing is, you are a working actor and you're going gig to gig, and you're thrilled if you get a part. It's so unlikely. The odds are so crazy, and it wasn't the world of just shameless self-promotion then either. It really, and I
Right.
had no interest in having a manager because I felt like I've got a great agent. What do I need a manager for? So I never had that outlook or that point of view on the career. I just love doing the work. I was still able to do some theater. I worked a fair amount at the Mark Taper Forum in Los Angeles and over the years. And so I was having a wonderful life. I was just really enjoying what I was able to do any given year as an actor. And as I always have to remind the fans, nobody knew the films were going to be iconic films. I mean, none of them. You make a film, you throw your dice and you take your chance. And the fact that three or four of these films have wound up being the iconic films that they are is just as unbelievable to me as it is to anybody else. And all the filmmakers will say that too. You don't go into it thinking, okay, this is a hit, this one's going to last 35, 40, 50 years. You just make a movie.
Yeah, but you do, I'm sure you've been on set sometimes. I've talked to some actors, when it's not working, right? I mean, you can feel sometimes, this
And you
production just
get,
doesn't seem to
yeah,
have it.
yeah, and you get better and better at that. And you can feel very strongly when there's just no imaginative mind at the helm. It's just, and television, unfortunately, has been, I don't think this is true any longer, but certainly at that time, it was a very rote kind of factory setup way of doing things because it almost had to be given the technology of the equipment at that time. Now, it's so mobile and it's so fast and wonderful. The technology of it is incredible. So you don't have big lights that you're carrying around everywhere. I mean, it still happens, but you can do films on a much smaller basis and get them done and have a lot of fun in the doing. So, but when it would come along, when there would be somebody at the helm, there are a number of things that stand out. I mean, one of the most fun things I ever did was Albert Brooks' Real Life, which I still think is hilarious. But that was the smallest budget thing I'd ever been involved in. But I loved his work. I just wanted to work with him. And he had seen me in a project that was a wonderful project called Washington Behind Closed Doors. And he had seen me, and he got in touch with the agency and said, I'd like to meet her. Well, I was thrilled because I just thought he was crazy good and a lot of fun. And then Chuck Roden got on that film, and suddenly there was just this lovely team working together, very, very small, nobody making any money, schlepping our own costumes, all of that kind of thing. And it was just a great time. So there was that. And then to go on to the larger productions and the larger production values, um, it's really who's at the helm, and how do they work with you, and how do they work with actors, and are they interested in actors' points of view? And many aren't, but the really good ones are, and that makes That makes it a lot of fun. So
You
I will say that on all of the iconic projects, well, with maybe one slight exception, I had a great, no, I don't go into it. I had a great time and worked with wonderful actors, really giving terrific actors. And yeah, how lucky am I?
Oh, incredibly blessed, I'm sure. I've always thought that a director should listen. I mean, I'm sure every actor thinks that the director should listen to them, but no one's thinking about your character more than you are. You know, the director's thinking about your character, but not as much as you are. And I don't know why more directors aren't receptive to that kind of input.
No, I know. I think the really imaginative and confident directors are. I mean, they do. Now, if you're working with somebody like, who has just a very specific vision, um, is it, oh God, now I'm going to really be embarrassed, but it's Wes Anderson, isn't it? Didn't he
Mhm.
do Hotel, what's his, the,
Oh,
yeah,
yes, he
he
did.
did.
You caught me
Well,
now where I can't
yeah,
think of the
I
name.
know, I know. Oh, good. That makes two of us.
Royal Tenenbaums? No. Oh,
Budapest,
Grand
Budapest.
Budapest Hotel. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, we got there.
We got there.
You know, I love his style, and I think he's brilliant at what he does. So if you're going into something into a director's work like that, you're going to have a real affinity and a feel for what they're, and you will mold your work to be commensurate with their vision. But in that case, they also, I mean, he has a reputation for working with actors really wonderfully, and so I expect, just from looking at his work, that he's very good at working with actors.
Yeah, I'm sure you always look for that as an actor working with the director. You mentioned the iconic movies, of course, Footloose, huge, Kevin Bacon. Um,
That
I'm
was
sure
some,
that got you a lot of recognition after that. Was that your first big hit where people started saying, "Hey, are you?"
no, I don't think so. Yeah, at that point in time, I was still being recognized quite a bit for Apple's Way.
For Apple's Way?
Yeah, so I think Apple's Way really kicked up the sort of recognition thing. So I was kind of used to being recognized, not in a big way, but occasionally. And a lot of times people would know they knew me, but they couldn't figure out from where. And was I their bank teller or and it's just because of the nature of TV, and especially a family show like that where you're just kind of, everybody thinks they know you, and that's fine, that's nice. um, I was particularly delighted working on Footloose because of the other actors who were in it, and we were sort of on in at summer camp together in Provo, Utah, all parked in the same motel, and we had a ball. I mean, working with all of those actors was really a delight.
So did Footloose lead to Gremlins? Was that kind of like a
Oh,
can you draw a direct line there?
it's terrible because I honestly I have so much trouble remembering exactly. They came in a clump.
Right.
I feel like Footloose was, let's see, how did that go?
They were both 84.
They were both
Um,
84, and I
mhm.
think that I think what it came down to was that I was going to have to choose one or the other because they had conflicting schedules. And God bless Steven Spielberg, because I believe he's the one who worked it out so that I could come back and do Gremlins and do both. So they were pretty simultaneous experiences in a way. Couldn't have been more different,
Oh,
just in
yeah, slightly.
the experience itself. But they were both really a lot of fun in that way.
So I'm assuming the connection to Steven Spielberg then in Gremlins and Amblin, that movie directed by Chris Columbus, who of course did Home Alone and the Harry Potter films, the first couple. Great director.
Great.
Um, really great director. And I've listened to a lot of his interviews, and he does seem like an actor's director.
Well, not at that. I have to say, not maybe not at that time. Gremlins was his first real breakthrough.
Right.
So he was very much listening to Steven, and Steven was very much shaping that film. I'm sure you've heard the story that originally my character was supposed to be beheaded with my head rolling down the stairs and so forth. Basically, Stephen said to Joe Dante, "Well, we're not going to do that. No, that's not gonna happen. Thank goodness."
Yeah, that would have been a gruesome image. But the Steven Spielberg connection, is that how, Amblin being the production company, that's how you got on the radar for Back to the Future, I'm assuming?
Absolutely, absolutely true. And Stephen, I knew on a kind of a backward sort of a way, kind of through actually Amy Irving, who was his girlfriend at that time. They were a couple, or for a part of that time. And I knew Amy from American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco. So I sort of knew Stephen as her rather shy, goofy boyfriend, and he was kind of around, and in people's radar. I remember Chuck Roden talking about him, and so this guy, I guess this guy is a really sought after director. I don't know, saw him at a party or something and thought, "Well, this guy, okay." Well, anyway, we all,
Yeah.
we all have come to love and admire this wonderful human being he is, and the amazing director, producer,
Oh,
film
he's incredible.
savant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe one of the greatest storytellers in American history.
Mhm, mm.
There's a line from Cubby Broccoli, who was the producer of the James Bond movies, because
Oh,
Steven
yeah.
wanted to do a Bond movie. He wanted to direct it, and Cubby Broccoli's response was, "Well, let's see how your little fish movie does first." And then I think Steven got the better end of that one.
I think so.
I think so. So you go in for Back to the Future. What do you remember when what was your first memory of getting contacted for the project?
Uh, I think probably it would have been my agent, it would have been Bobby Gersh calling and saying, "Steven specifically wants you to come in and meet this up and coming director that, this film." He said he's a little embarrassed because he doesn't know if you want to do it. It's a really small role. And, after I'd been in larger roles in Gremlins and Footloose, he felt a little sheepish, I think, about asking me if I'd be interested. Well, of course I was interested. I'm always interested. And especially because he was behind it. And plus I got to go over to the Amlin uh, offices, which had just opened up, and everybody wanted to get in there and see what they were like. And it was great. And I met Robert Zemeckis, and I think I may have met Bob Gale in passing. I don't remember Bob being there in that particular meeting when I first met Robert, but it was just the simplest, most fun little meeting. We just had a chat. It was kind of like the one in Gremlins. I just went in and met with Joe, and um, just had some nice chats about our lives and what we were all doing and how things were going. And then at the end of the meeting, he said, "Well, I'd love you to do this movie if you want to do this." And I said, "Oh yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun. Let's do it." So that was fun.
And of course, Back to the Future, 1985, Michael J. Fox, was famously not the original Marty. Originally, it was Eric Stoltz. Did you shoot
Correct.
with Eric?
I did. I did.
Okay. And how was that working with him?
Great. I mean, he had gone to school at USC with my niece, Christina Rideout, and she was. So I had seen a couple of his showcases, as I recall, and I knew he was a good actor. So I was thrilled for him that he had gotten this opportunity, and we had a very easy, reasonably easy, pleasant day of shooting. It was early on, I believe, in the process for them, all of them, and then yeah, it went fine. We got all the work done, and that was that. I went home. That was that. That was the gig, and it must have been, I don't know how long it was, at least a month probably, um, when I got a call from Bobby saying, "Well, they've recast that role." I said, "Oh no, you're kidding. Is everything okay?" He said, "Yeah, he's fine. It just didn't work out. They wanted to go in another direction." That's the famous Hollywood phrase,
Yes.
going in another direction. Oh, really? Up, down? West.
Any way away from you, whichever
Yeah,
direction is away from you, that's what direction we're going.
that's right. Precisely. So, so I said, okay, all right, great. Who's going to do it? He said, Michael J. Fox. I said, oh, that'll be fun. Great. He should be very good in this. And so I went back and all the same people except Michael. And then as soon as we got to work, I felt like, oh, very different energy. Oh, this is fun. It just kind of lifted all boats in a way. It had more of a just an ensemble kind of a feel to it. I think, and looking back on it, it's everything that is everybody sort of understands about why they decided to go in that direction. Eric was a fabulous actor. He was a really wonderful actor. He's a little more cerebral than Michael, a little more internalized than Michael. Michael's a much more extroverted, puts it out there kind of an actor, equally good actors. But definitely it had a wonderful energy that I think really changed the feel of the film. And I got it. I just got it right away. By the end of the day, I totally understood what what had been missing in the other work and what Bob Zemeckis and Bob Gale were really writing for.
And of course, you play Stella Baines, the mother, I guess the grandmother of Marty, but the mother of Leah Thompson's character, Lorraine Baines. Um, my father was born in the mid 40s, 1945, and when we watched the movie together, he's like, "Man, they really nail, especially your character.
Uh,
What mothers were like, when
oh,
he was
sure.
growing up, because he was probably 10 or 11 around 1955." And he's
Right.
like, "That's just kind of that's exactly how the times were." Did that help you, like
You
knowing
bet.
you've kind of been through
You
that
bet.
time?
Yeah, you bet. And also another thing that kind of helped me, I think, was once I got in costume and I got on set and they did my hair and makeup, and I looked in the mirror and I thought, oh God, I look like Lucille Ball.
Yeah, there was
And
a Lucy
there's a
there.
little bit of a Lucy thing that creeps
Mhm.
in there. And I didn't plan that. I mean, it just really came off feeling that era and seeing the look of my character in the mirror and being reminded. And it just kind of gave it a buoyancy too that I did associate with women of the time. I mean, for sure, was post-war, and there was an optimistic feel in the world, and television was this fabulous new thing. And yeah, so sweet of your dad to say that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely, and, that scene, the scene that you're in is what has my favorite line from the whole movie, which is when he says, uh, he's an idiot, it comes from upbringing, his parents are probably idiots too. I mean,
Right.
it's my favorite line in the whole movie. Um, there's also a point though to where, they say, "Who the hell is John F. Kennedy?" Right? And little did anybody in the country know 5 years from then he'd be the president of the United States.
Absolutely.
Now
Yeah.
I always like to I had Burton Gillum on a few weeks ago, who of course was in Paper Moon and Back to the Future 3. I'm always interested for people who were around for with Kennedy's assassination, because
Oh,
I'm in Houston, Texas. I'm a few hundred miles north of where it happened, or south
yeah.
of where it happened.
Right. Right.
What do you remember about that day?
Oh God. I was in college, and it was, shortly before Thanksgiving, right before our Thanksgiving break. And it turned out that I was staying, and I'm not sure, I can't remember why, but I had to stay on campus over the Thanksgiving holiday. I get probably because I was going home for Christmas, and to fly from Chicago to Los Angeles was no mean feat, and it was expensive. So it was one or the other. It was either I was going to stay in school for Thanksgiving, or I was going to go home, stay home at Christmas, which I really didn't want to do, which was a longer break. So I had to stay on campus, and my boyfriend at the time was going off on a hunting trip. It was Wisconsin.
Right.
And it was dismal. I mean, it was just a really dismal, sad, horrible time. But I got sick. I got a little bit of the flu or something. And I was in the infirmary right before the break, and there was all this whispering going on, and oh my God, oh no, I could hear this. It was very spooky and awful. And I got up out of bed and I went out to wherever there was a nurse, and she told me that the president had been killed. And I was just I probably had a fever. It was a terrible time anyway. I remember that I just got up and got dressed and said, I'm gonna leave because I wanted to find my boyfriend. I mean, I just wanted to find somebody solid I could hang on to. And so I did, and I just remember that we spent a long time just walking around campus being so stunned and so frightened. And we had already been through the Bay of Pigs scare, which had been horrible too, because suddenly all the guys on campus thought, well, I guess we're going to war. And we were all, it was a very, very difficult, tense time. So I remember that very clearly. And then, very interestingly, and it may have been 1976-ish, I want to say, I did a television movie called The Killing of Lee Har no,
The
the
trial of Lee Harvey
trial
Oswald.
the trial of Lee Harvey Oswald, thank you, yeah, and I did it there, and we were the first group of people allowed into the book depository for the filming
Oh,
after
wow.
this, and so that was an extraordinary experience because it was intact. It was exactly as it had been left after the assassination, after all the investigation, after the investigators left and everybody got sealed up. And we were, I forget Larry's last name, but he was the producer, writer, and he was a he was a master at getting people to do things for him, and he got us in there. And we were it was I just remember so clearly being up in that. Lauren Green, and I and a few of the crew were up in the depository, and I sat in that window and I looked out that very window onto the grassy knoll, and it was just a very odd sensation to have lived through that. Lived through it at college and then.
Reliving through it, right? Just, some years later. I actually went to the depository for the first time this year, like about
uh
2 months ago,
It's
and
open now, right?
it's open, yeah,
Yeah,
and it's the JFK Museum, and staring out that window, it sends the chill up your spine,
yeah,
it really does. It's a
yeah.
very, very odd feeling being there. Um, well, again, Back to the Future comes out, it's a massive hit. All these years later, people are still talking about it. They're still wanting to see more, do more. I'm sure you're at conventions all the time. People are telling you what the movies mean to them. Of course, they're near and dear to my heart. What does Back to the Future mean to you, though?
Well, now it means a whole other thing than what it meant at the time, and now I am just, gobsmacked really by the adoration of the fans, the fact that we're into our 3rd generation of fandom now, and that it has this enduring quality, and the fans themselves, there's a real in my experience, there's quite a sweetness to the people who, attach themselves to this film and care about this film and wanna pass it on to their own to their children and their grandchildren, and, as something sort of wonderful. It's to me, I think it's the way I felt and feel about It's a Wonderful Life, which for me was one of the great films of all time. So
Mhm.
I can relate to how personal, an attachment people can have to a film, and I'm just d honored, to be a part of something that has created that kind of response in people. And it's what you always wish for. You always hope that the work you're involved in will have an effect, and preferably an effect for the positive and the good, but you never know. So it's been a real delight, and I'm so happy for everyone who was involved in it.
It's impacted millions of people and myself included. So I really appreciate the time. I'm going to stick to our time here. I really appreciate it,
Brad. Thanks.
Francis, for you taking the time to talk to me today. And I just really appreciate it.
Well, me too. It's been a real pleasure. You're just very easy to talk to, and I love your enthusiasm for all things film.
Well, we'll have to do it again sometime. The legend herself, Frances Lee McCain, joins us today. Frances, thanks so much.
Thank you, Brad.